Hey folks, Marcus here from the Ashland Fly Shop. We're back at the Vise. We got winter steelhead coming into some of the rivers on the southern Oregon coast, at least we hear. So we're gonna tie a little winter steelhead intruder that I whipped up. Kind of got some vibrant colors going on in it, and an interesting wing with a new material we brought in. So let's get into it. So for a shank, I'll have Aquafly's 27mm return eye shank, which, as you can see, there's 4 of them in there. I feel like all the other packs of shanks that I have like 15 of them in there. So I think this is the most popular shank that I use in my tying. It's just such a sweet length. You can tie summer steelhead stuff, fall, and winter steelhead stuff like we are today. So I've got 50D gel spun Vise in black, and I'll start it right up around the eye and just come all the way back to my vise. Trying to get a solid thread base on the shank. And then I pre-rigged what is my ultra rig setup. It's 30-pound fire line, rubber tubing, and a size 2 no escape hook from Owner. If you want to find out exactly how to rig those, we made a video about doing that recently, so you can check that out, but I'm just going to tie it on here. And I'll keep these strands of fire line on the top of the shank as I come forward. Trying to keep even thread wraps. And then I'll duck those through the eye, fold them over, come all the way up to the eye, and then start my way back here. I'll trim those so that they are going to lay down right at the back end of the shank. And I'll just do one more pass, trying to keep nice, tight, even tension around the shank, evenly spaced thread wraps. Then I'm ready to put on my eye. You can use a bunch of different eyes for this. I kind of like the way the chartreuse pops against the other colors. The first couple flies like this that I tied had blue. I think the navy blue from Aquaflies, the kingfisher, the purple, geez, pink. You could do whatever you want. Today I'm going to do chartreuse because I like the way it looks. And I'll just come around these with a figure 8. And every couple wraps, I'll just pull that thread tight. They're on there pretty good. And then I'll come to the back of the fly, and I'll just get started with a little dubbing loop. Tie it off here. I'm going to get some wax in this loop here. And this is just going to be a little rear station on the back of the fly. I'll put my dubbing loop on there. And then I've got all my dubbing on these loon bench rings, which is kind of a nice way to go. Keeps them all organized. And what I'm going to use for this fly is Senyo's Fusion Dub in the Pink Lady. It's just such a good winter color. So I just have a little kind of slot cut out of the bottom corner, and then I pull it out, and it keeps that dubbing nice and sparse when you pull it out. I'll open up my dubbing loop, get that stuff in there. Then for my rear prop, this fly has got a purple and blue scheme going on it. So for the rear prop, I'm going to use Arctic Fox in purple. I'm going to pull out some of this under fur here. And then I'm just left with some of the spiny material, but I don't want any of these really long feathers. I'm just going to keep these spiny Arctic Fox hairs, put them in my loop right up next to my dubbing, and then give it a good spin. And just let that twister do its magic. Then I like to come through, pick it all out. I even sometimes come through with a second, more spiny pick. These finger picks that we have really grab a lot of stuff. And then I'll start to wrap. And not a very big ball on the back, but just giving that color contrast is what I'm looking for back there. Having that nice bright spot out of the back of the fly. And as I wrap this Arctic Fox, I kind of fold it so that it's almost like a little chenille that we're wrapping around the hook. And I'll grab that loop and tie it off. And I'll come through, make sure that that loop is tied off, and I'll come through and pick it out again. Make sure none of those fibers are trapped. You can see, if you're looking at other videos where they have more of the under fur of Arctic Fox, you can tell how those taller, spinier materials on the fox really just kind of stand straight up. And that's what we're looking for in a prop. We want it to stand up as much as possible, because that's going to help whatever comes after just stick up a little bit more. So I'm going to start another dubbing loop right at the base of that Arctic Fox. Come forward a little bit. This one will take a little bit more dubbing wax to make it happen. Just going to get wax on both sides of the thread there. And put my dubbing spinner in and just let it hang. Then I'm going to use MFC Ostrich in purple for the rear station. And I want to gauge it so it's long enough to cover the hook, but not super long, which for these feathers, that's just going to be about the whole length of the feather there. So I've got maybe 1.5 inches of ostrich cut out. And I'm going to get it in my loop with this little amount of tag ends hanging out there. Might even clip them a little bit just to make sure I don't have a bunch of tag ends. Then I'll start to spin, kind of checking it more than I do with the dubbing and the Arctic Fox. I'll kind of spin it a little bit, check it, make sure none of those fibers are getting trapped, because with ostrich, when you're spinning, that's one of the main frustrations, is when these long fibers get caught up here or get caught on themselves. So you just kind of go slow and but it'll work. Then I've got just a little thing of water sitting on the side of me. And I really, anymore, I do not like wrapping ostrich when it's dry. It's just so much harder to work with than when you've wet it, because you can fold it back against those stems. And having the wet hands will help that rear prop lay down when you're wrapping as well, so that you're not trapping any of the Arctic fox. And I just, as you see, about every half turn I'm grabbing that ostrich and making sure that it's laying down the way I want it to. Making sure none of it's trapped. Then I'll grab that loop and tie it off. And I will wrap back on this ostrich a little bit. I typically don't, but I am going to wrap back on the ostrich in this fly just to keep that rear station nice and tidy, because it's not going to have a collar to pretty everything up. A lot of times we put a strung Chinese or schlappen collar on a station like that to cover the butt ends, or to cover up any undesirable fluff in there, but this pattern is not going to have a collar on that rear station. And the reason for that is because I'm going to use jungle cock as kind of a splayed wing off the back end of the fly. And if you don't have the real thing, we have imitation jungle cock from both aqua flies and from Pro Sport Fisher, and both of them are pretty dang good, because jungle cock has become a hard to find feather. So I'm going to pick two that are kind of halfway up this cape. And I'm going to match the tips more or less and peel away all this fluff. All right, so I'm going to rotate my vise and try and get this guy to lay as flat as possible. You can see it's really wanting to bend. So I've got it pretty dang flat there. I'm going to leave the stem in until I get the other one. I'm going to do the same thing. Rotate the vise. Try and get this guy to cooperate. This one's angled a little bit further down than I'd like. Sometimes it helps just to get one wrap on that stem, and it'll kind of just keep it in place but not locked down. All right, that's looking more or less symmetrical. You can see from the top angle, it's just a nice V coming out the back of the fly. They're more or less in the same position, which just means if the fly's seen from the bottom, one of them's not tilting over real crazy. And as you look out the side of the fly from each angle, they both have a little bit of an up angle. You can spend as long as you want trying to perfect how those go in there. Today, that's as long as I want to spend. I could get them to be a little bit straighter, but I'm not overly concerned with it at the moment. All right, now I'm going to tie in my ribbing for the body, which is French tinsel small silver. And I really like French tinsel as a rib. I just think it gives the fly a really classy look. So especially because I wrapped back on that ostrich, I am going to wrap this French tinsel. Let's turn the vise so you can see it all the way through the body, because you can see I've got this little bulge going on the back end towards the rear prop. And if I tied in the French tinsel short, just towards the back end of the body, it would just continue to build up this bump in the back of the fly. And that is really something to avoid. You want to keep, I mean, ideally there would be no little bump at the back end of the fly, but one way to flatten them out a little bit is any of your body materials, just tie them through the length of the body. And they won't, that back bump, as opposed to as if you tied in that material back here, you've just got, it's spreading that bulk over the whole body, which is a good thing. So this is purple crinkle mirror flash that I'm just going to wrap through the body. You can see a strand popped out there because these sometimes have different lengths, especially if you chop them at different lengths. I'm not super concerned about that little tag of flash. I'll just cut it real short, and any tag that's in there is going to get caught by my ribbing, which is the French tinsel, which gives it a cool look through the body, helps protect that crinkle mirror flash, so that the body on this fly will last more than one fish. If you just have the flash by itself in the body, really the first steelhead that latches onto it is going to rip that flash. So the French tinsel gives us a little durability, little insulation. So I'm going to start another dubbing loop up towards the front, give it a couple wraps, and all. Oh, so it should be said, so oftentimes on the rear station of an intruder, we have a collar that gives a little bulk and covers up some of the stuff going on in the rear station. And I typically do that, but I almost never put a collar on a station on top of jungle cock, because I could have stripped the feather further and put the eyes further back, and then the collar would only cover the top part, the stem of the feather, and that can be cool. But when you've just got a feather tied in like this, leaving out the collar just gives it that stark contrast, just makes it a lot more impressive looking in the fly, as opposed to putting this nice eye in there and then just throwing a material on top of it. So I hope that makes sense why I left the collar off there. All right, so I'm going to do the same dubbing, which is Senyo's Fusion dubbing in the Pink Lady. I just really like this color. And I'm going to pick out maybe close to twice as much, or like 40% more than I used in the rear station. Then as a prop, I'm going to use Arctic Fox in Kingfisher Blue from Hairline. Same thing. I've got guard hairs and under fur going on here. I'm going to pull out, oh, not that much. I'm going to pull out a lot of the under fur. This one's kind of bent over from sitting in the package. And then I'm gonna trim it so it's nice and thin. This station will be more material and longer fibers than what I had going on in the rear station on the Fly. I like my Intruders, like a lot of people, to have a bigger front station than a rear station. I think the rear station can have longer fibers for sure than the front station, and that looks really cool in the water to have long fibers hanging out off the back end of the rear station. But there's kind of a really cool look to having more bulk going on in the front station. And this Arctic fox from being in the package, you can see how it kind of gets, some of the feathers get, or the fur gets bent in the package. It's kind of got a crazy look when it's spun on there like that. Not to fear, it will look good in the water. I am going to wet that down just so it doesn't bother me how some of those fibers are splaying forward. And I'm going to give myself a nice clean space. Clean space to wrap on top of this stuff. So, got it all dialed in. And before I put any ostrich on here, I am gonna do a little fin raccoon wing, which will just help make that front station a little more impressive. I'm going to pull out a lot of the guard hairs here and just get a clump of this fin raccoon. I'll rotate the vise so I'm looking straight down the shank, which is anytime you're putting a material that you want to sit right on top of the shank, it's a good idea to rotate your vise and be looking right down the shank. Whoop, clip my thread. All right, then on top of that, I am going to build a dubbing loop. Give it a couple turns. I'm going to get some good amount of dubbing wax going in there. Then for the front station, I'm going to use MFC Ostrich in Kingfisher Blue, which is a very nice color. And I'm not going to use a whole bunch of it. I've got about an inch of ostrich in my hand here. And I just need to open my loop and lay it in the loop. So I've got longer feathers, but not more feathers than the rear station. And I'll just give it some spinning. And I'm going to wet it down. Pretty much just looks like a fancy blue and purple mini intruder. It's a little bit bigger, bulkier, got some extra steps going on in it, but that's the core concept. So over that kingfisher blue ostrich, I'm going to put just a couple strands of this same flash crinkle mirror that I used in the body. I'll just lay 2 of them on my near side, fold it over, 2 of them on my far side. You can leave them long through the fly. I'm going to clip them so they just come to about halfway down the purple ostrich hanging off the rear station. And if you were wondering, yes, there is more materials in this fly. So I'm going to use a little bit of marabou up on the top. And this is the Select Marabou from Wapsi in the peacock blue, which is probably, we've had a tough time getting this material, so hopefully by the time this video comes out, we can actually sell you some of this stuff, because this is like the coolest color blue that's available in my mind as far as marabou goes. So, not going to use a whole bunch of marabou. It's just going to help bulk up the top of the fly. Probably just going to use a little bit less than an inch. And I'll find a tie-in point. Something that I'm thinking more about is color transition, which I think is one of the harder things to really achieve when you're tying a fly and doing it dry, because you get a sense of it when you're just tying, but it really, you can't tell quite what's going on until you swim your flies. And color transition, to me, once you get all the other parts of a steelhead fly nailed down, you know, you understand proportions and building your props and, you know, the right amount of materials and all that stuff, getting color transition where when you want them, you've got stark contrast points like bright on the back end, dark on the top end, or doing smoother color transition. So you can see the marabou's a little bit lighter than the ostrich and it's darker on the back end. So when this thing's in the water, you have a nice smooth transition from dark to light. It's a small detail, but it's something that it's kind of the one part of Intruder patterns that I'm really trying to dial in at the moment. All right, it's looking just a teeny bit thin on the front end, and one of the best things you can do to bulk up the front end of an intruder is put a little schloppen on it, and that's what we're going to do. And this is Kingfisher schloppen. Chris is looking at me like I'm making a super long fly time video right now, which you might be out there looking at me saying the exact same thing. We don't make simple flies here at the Action Fly Shop, just really complicated ones. I was making some flies a couple weeks ago, and sent a photo over to John and said, I'm excited to get skunked with these pretty flies. And he said that should be a blog, how to get skunked with pretty flies. Because we're pretty good at that around here. Some
pretty spade casts.
Get skunked with pretty spade casts. That'll be the second blog that we make. But I mean, come on. You can't tell me that Schloppen didn't do something. All right, if you've made it to the end of the video and you're like, what the heck is the new material that this fly is tied with? And why do I have to wait to the end of a 30-minute video? You're gonna find out right now. So this is Lady Amherst, and it's not new by any means, but we used to carry it a long time ago here at the shop. Big, long center tails. Hard to ship to people. They cost 28 bucks now. They used to be like, you know, I remember when they were 10 or 12 bucks. They've gone up because of the scarcity of the birds. So we've started buying the whole tails and cutting them into thirds. It's a good length to ship. They cost 9 bucks for a third of a tail. And you could buy, you know, a couple different colors and have it be, you could get a couple colors worth for that same price of a whole center tail. So it's pretty slick, and we like it. And usually you'll see Amherst splayed through this, you know, through marabou or through ostrich to give that kind of speckled barring. But how I am going to use it today is as a wing. I started doing this last fall on my traditional steelhead flies. And when we got the Amherst back in a couple weeks ago, I was like, why the heck not do it on an Intruder? And it's a kind of a pain to do. And you guys are gonna suffer through this pain with me right now, because it's kind of a process. So you can take, for a married wing, typically you'd cut from the opposite side of the feather, or better yet, you'd have two feathers, to a matched pair, where you got a long end on this side and a long end on the other side of the matched pair, and you'd cut on the left side of the left wing and the right side of the right wing. We don't have a matched pair. The nice thing about Amherst is, as you can see, it's a little bit pliable. So the fibers stay together without breaking apart, and that makes it a great married wing material. And it also makes it nice because you can oftentimes grab the feather. You can cut from the same side of the feather and make it work, which a lot of feathers you can't do that. So you always want the shiny side out. You do one slow wrap, really loose wrap, going directly over the material. The second one comes in the same position, and you pull straight down, not to the side or any other direction, but straight down. And that is your best bet to getting that material to stick down the way you want it. It's close. In Amherst, I said, it's a pretty easy material to kind of get it in line the way you want it compared to some other materials out there. And the thing I've found about merriwings, it's kind of a ridiculous pursuit, because when you fish them, they get moved around, the feathers, you know, like Amherst, those fibers will detach from each other. I suppose you could get some lacquering involved. But the fly, after fishing it, after you hook fish, like that married wing, I should have brought one in that's been fished and been eaten by a fish, because those feathers will get kind of splayed out. It's never going to look as good as it does right now. But we're steelhead fishermen. The fish don't care about the flies. We care about the flies. So we've tied a pretty fly, and we're going to go get skunked with it. Let me whip finish here. And that wing, you could certainly tie it longer. This one that I brought from home has a longer wing over the top. And I would say I made it work cutting from both sides of the feather, but I can just see how these fibers want to splay in different directions. So to make it easier on yourself, either take off the long side, because they'll be more bendable, or just cut from similar points on opposite sides of the feather, and that's really going to be something that'll help you out. But it gives a cool barring contrast through the fly. Gives it a cool look. The fish don't care. We care. I'll get a little UV going around this eye, and then we'll call it a day here. So thank you very much for tuning in. This is a little winter steelhead bug. Lady Amherst is available now at the Ashland Fly Shop. We have it in natural, orange, kingfisher blue, and purple. I do imagine that we'll build that out over time, but that's what we've got available now. Thank you very much for tuning in.